The following video contains images and scenes of the horrifying events that happened at Imola 1994, including the fatal accidents. If you are under the age of 13 or these deaths affect you in any way, then please do not watch this video. Any images, audio or footage that you see in this video is not owned by me and is owned by its copyright holders. I do not claim to own any of these things, and this video was made purely for educational purposes only, therefore protected under fair use. Humans have always had a fascination with being faster, being the fastest. In whatever regards, we've always wanted to be quick at something, and that can be shown perfectly with cars. Formula 1 is the peak of motorsport racing, where athletes have to be in peak physical condition to essentially manhandle these multi-million cars through tight turns and around other multi-million cars. Formula 1 is the ultimate test of technology and a game of nerves, and over the years, multiple people have stood at the top of this mountain. Hamilton, Vettel, Alonso, Schumacher, and the main man of this video, Ayrton Senna. Whilst Formula 1's most appealing factor is its speed, it is also paired up with another appealing factor: danger. People like to think when I talk about robot combat, that's one of the most dangerous things to ever do. And to a certain extent they are right, but I would honestly rather be standing in front of a combat robot spinning weapon than sitting in a cockpit driving over 200 miles an hour then going flat out into a corner. That is terrifying, which makes it all the more impressive that people are able to step into these cars, stare death right in the eyes and keep driving. They have nerves of absolute steel. Nowadays, Formula 1 is all about the safety of its drivers, but it wasn't always like that, and one crucial event happened in Formula 1's history that made the safety of the drivers more important than anything else. Imola 1994, the San-Marino Grand Prix, a race weekend that got progressively worse as it went on. I am the Seaborg, and this is the darkest weekend in Formula 1. Let's set the scene by introducing you all to Ayrton Senna, a man many people argue is the greatest Formula 1 driver of all time. Hailing from Brazil, Senna had previously won the Formula 1 World Championship 3 times in 1988, 1990 and 1991. Senna was most known for driving for Team McLaren, with the bright white and sun-glow orange McLaren being his most recognisable car. However, in 1994, Senna's contract with the team had expired, and unimpressed with the team and how they were moving forward, he looked towards another team, and in 1994, the seat to be in was a Williams. Williams won the 1993 Constructors' Championship with their car, the FW15C, one of the most legendary cars in Formula 1 for being at the time a technical marvel. The FW15C used a reliable and proven car body, cramming in a lot of at the time brand new technology, electronic driver aids such as anti-lock brakes, traction control and active suspension. All of this Senna really liked the sound of. He wanted to be in that seat for 1994, and once his former teammate and strongest competitor Alain Prost left the team and retired, Senna got that seat. However, for 1994, all of Williams' hard work would be torn up, as in 1994 all driver aids were banned from being used, which meant most of the things that made Williams successful and dominant, like the anti-lock brakes, traction control and active suspension, would be gone. Now we enter Imola, the home of the third race in the championship calendar. Prior to this, Ayrton Senna had achieved pole position, the first place on the grid at both previous races. However, due to 2 instances where he spun out and was hit from behind, Senna was out of both races, with his championship rival Michael Schumacher gaining the full 20 points in his Benetton B194 at both Brazil and the Pacific Grand Prix. One thing to note about Formula 1 was that people at the time thought car safety was at its best and that no one could be killed. And to be fair, it's easy to see why that claim had been made. The last death in a Formula 1 race was in 1982 at Canada, where Riccardo Paletti had sadly passed on. This was almost 12 years going without a single fatality in a race. Well, this weekend was about to shatter and undo all of that. Senna was doing well, all things considered. 15 minutes into Friday qualifying, he managed to drive his Williams that he was struggling with to an amazing drive of 1 minute 22.4 seconds. And Senna was not alone in great speed. Fellow Brazilian Rubens Barrichello was doing quite well in his Jordan. Many people have said that Barrichello would be Senna's successor, the next big thing in Formula 1, the person who would carve the new path for talent. Barrichello's speed caused this to happen. His speed being clocked at 140 miles an hour upon impact. The speed being too much caused his car to jump the curb and essentially mount the tyre wall, causing the car to go nose first into the grass, its tyres flying off as it barrel rolls, landing upside down. If you saw that crash for the first time, what was your reaction? Shock? Fear? Scared? Medical teams were quick on the crash, including Chief Medical Officer Professor Sid Watkins. Marshals were also quick to get to the car, but because there was a chance the car could catch fire, they had to right the car. This led to it being pushed over and letting gravity drop it back down. Barrichello's helmet shook upon impact, almost lifeless. If Barrichello had suffered a neck or spinal injury, that recovery could have made things a lot worse. At the crash, they had realised that Barrichello had actually swallowed his tongue and they had to think quick to get it unlodged and let oxygen run through him. Before this, Barrichello was clinically dead for 6 minutes. Arriving at the medical centre, he was closely inspected and aside from his nose, Barrichello appeared fine. Visibly shaken, but thankfully fine. To this day, despite seeing it and everything that had happened before and after, Barrichello cannot remember a thing about the crash. Senna went to the medical centre to see Barrichello, who was a good friend of his. Barrichello has gone on to say, quote, "The first face I saw was Ayrton's. He had tears in his eyes. I had never seen that with Ayrton before. I just had the impression he felt as if my accident was like one of his own." Due to his injuries, Barrichello could take no further part in that Grand Prix weekend. He would be taken to hospital to stay overnight in case there were any other injuries people were unaware of. Meanwhile, qualifying resumed and at the end of it all, Senna would achieve the fastest time of the session with his championship rival Michael Schumacher in second. After the events of the day prior, people were a little on edge, but it was turned around into how safe the cars were and that whilst the drivers would be shaken by any crash that could happen, no one would get hurt. 28 cars had gone down to 27 for qualifying. This would determine the positions of the cars on the starting grid for the next day, everyone gunning to get the best possible position they can, and for Senna, that was pole. And honestly, with a man of his talents, are you going to argue that he wouldn't be in at least the top 3? Towards the back of the field was a young Austrian man, Roland Ratzenberger. This was only his second race in Formula 1, and he was driving for the team Simtech, who had an emphasis on accepting drivers who would pay their way into a seat. Despite his car being one of the slowest, it was still able to reach almost 200 miles an hour like the rest of the cars. 20 minutes into qualifying, Ratzenberger made a mistake that caused some front wing damage, and that got lodged under his car going towards the Villeneuve corner. Not being able to turn, he went in. This was another horrifying crash, and to make it even scarier, let me throw some numbers your way. 190 miles an hour upon contact with the concrete wall. Over 100 Gs of force applied to Ratzenberger upon impact. And it took 6 seconds from the car to go from 190 to a complete stop. Ratzenberger's body was subject to that 100 plus G's of force almost instantly, and unfortunately, his fate wasn't as fortunate as Barrichello's. Ratzenberger's neck broke in the crash. In the footage, you can see his head slumped onto one side, almost lifeless. And that is because he was lifeless. The impact breaking or snapping his neck killed him instantly, meaning he was dead before the car came to a stop. 25 seconds after the crash, Sid Watkins was on the scene with the rest of his medical team. They managed to restart his heart and take him to the medical centre before being flown to the local hospital via helicopter. Despite the team's best efforts to save him, Ratzenberger's heart stopped beating for a final time upon arrival at the hospital. Ratzenberger would be the first death that Formula 1 had seen at a race weekend for 12 years. Senna saw the crash from the paddock and stole a course car, driving to the scene of the accident. By the time he got there, Ratzenberger was already transported to the medical centre, but Senna inspected the Simtek car and how the crash could have happened. Driving back to the medical centre, he tried to see if he could see Ratzenberger. But Sid Watkins, who was a close friend of Senna's, stopped him and walked him away from the medical centre, informing Senna that Ratzenberger was dead. Senna was absolutely heartbroken and devastated. Upon hearing the news of his fellow driver, Senna broke down and started crying on Watkins' shoulder. Watkins tried to calm him down and comfort him. Seeing how much Ratzenberger's death affected him, Watkins said to Senna, quote, "Ayrton, why don't you give up racing tomorrow? I don't think you should do it. In fact, why don't you give it up altogether? What else do you need to do? You've been a world champion 3 times. You are obviously the quickest driver. Give it up and let's go fishing," implying that he would retire with him and they could leave the sport together. This almost convinced him, but despite seeing a fellow driver die, despite seeing 2 horrific crashes that weekend, Senna replied, "Sid, there are certain things over which we have no control. I cannot quit. I have to go on." For the rest of the day, everyone was upset. Despite this, qualifying continued 25 minutes after the crash, but both Williams and Benetton decided to withdraw from qualifying. Senna would still be on pole position, with Schumacher behind him completing the front row of the grid. At 2:15, it was announced to the world by Murray Walker that Ratzenberger was indeed dead.
I sadly have to report that the news is bad. 20 minutes into the 1-hour session, the very popular Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberger unaccountably went off the circuit at some 190 miles an hour straight into a concrete barrier at the side of the track. His car disintegrated, and by the time it had stopped, Roland was not only very clearly unconscious, but even more clearly in a very sick condition indeed. Ratzenberger was taken to Bologna Hospital by helicopter, and we have just had the very sad news that he has succumbed to his injuries.
Behind the scenes, Senna was in trouble with the FIA for stealing the course car. This made Senna very angry and more tense than he already was. Senna was actually supposed to be fined for it, but due to the circumstances of the day, he was let off with a warning and no fine. Senna went back to his motorhome and broke down, crying on the floor. There are people that say the race shouldn't have continued after Ratzenberger's passing, and that it was actually illegal for the race to go on. But despite him being dead upon impact, his heart didn't stop beating until the hospital, meaning technically Ratzenberger's death happened at the hospital. God, I know I'm going to get a lot of angry comments about this, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Everyone arrived, and now only 26 cars were on the grid. People were still visibly shaken after the 2 crashes and fatality that had already happened. But Formula 1 is like a travelling circus, and like with most circuses, no matter what, the show must go on. After going to the driver's briefing, Senna had a talk with his teammate Damon Hill, and Senna suggested to him and other drivers like Schumacher to bring back the Grand Prix Drivers Association to help make driver safety an absolute necessity. Senna, along with championship rivals Berger and Schumacher, would be the first directors. They all agreed to pressure the FIA to make the cars safer and put driver safety above the car's speed, and that they would continue to do so at Monaco. seeing 2 crashes and 1 fatality was already too much. They get back into their cars and go around for their parade lap to warm up the tyres, get rubber on the track and prepare for the race ahead.
So, stand by for blast off and for action from Imola. 61 laps of it. The green flag is showing. That means they're ready to go. Bruce, your rider can press the button. They'll have to stop the race, I'm sure, because there's debris on the circuit. That is Pedro Lamy. It's Pedro Lamy, who, the young Portuguese driver.
This crash happened because Schumacher's teammate JJ Leto stalled on the race start. Cars had to dodge and weave all around him, and sadly, the Lotus of Pedro Lamy almost rear-ended him. Thankfully, it was only just missed and collided with his wheels inside. However, this caused the wheels off the car to fly over the barricade and into the crowd. This resulted in 8 people being injured, including a police officer. People have said that this should have red flagged the race, but instead, the course marshals decided to bring out the safety car, which at the time wasn't a very fast or powerful car to keep the Formula 1 cars behind at decent speed. No. It was a Vauxhall Vectra, a f***ing road car that couldn't often go past 90, had to keep 24 Formula 1 cars that go normally 200 behind them. Do you know how mental that is? The safety car was out from lap 2 to lap 6, whilst they cleared the track of any debris from the crash, and removed the cars. During that whole time, Senna kept urging the safety car to go faster, as the tyres were cooling down and losing grip. But the safety car couldn't go any faster. Partly because it was a f***ing road car, but mostly because the car had already overcooked the brakes, meaning that they had to slow the car down into every turn without brakes, essentially lifting off. During this time, another crash happened between Eric Comas and Eric Bernard. Comas pitted to have the damage inspected, whilst Bernard continued on. At the end of lap 5, the safety car's lights went off and the car pulled back into the pits, meaning that on lap 6, the race continued, Senna leading with his championship rival Schumacher right behind him. What happens next is probably the reason you will know about this weekend.
Followed by Schumacher, there is Berger. We're on lap 6 now, and the San-Marino Grand Prix is go again, and as before, Schumacher is the chief rival to Ayrton Senna, who comes down to the Ravazza. Sorry, it wasn't the Ravazza. They're climbing up now towards the Marietta Alta as they go. The second Salva of Wendlinger. Bukio Katayama in the Tyrrell is in 9th place. Martin.
Raised speculation as to whether he was actually going to make just one stop and therefore race. Going to do that, that would slow him down far more than the performance here looks. It looks like perhaps that was a Benetton smoke screen. I'm not quite sure why they were so far up in the warm-up. With him.
Well, we are right with Michael Schumacher now, and Senna! My goodness! I just saw him plunge off to the right, and Senna has joined Pedro Lamy and JJ Leto in a shattered motor car. You can see the debris on the right. What on earth happened there? I don't know. Whether it was a sudden loss of downforce for some reason.
That crash was very similar to Ratzenberger's the day before. Senna went off the road at almost 200 miles an hour, but managed to slow it down before impact to 130 using the brakes. Still, the impact was massive and the G-force was similar to Barrichello's crash, almost 90 Gs of force. Course marshals were on it almost immediately. The race was initially yellow flagged to slow down all the cars before being red flagged once again that weekend, stopping the race until a restart was announced. On the TV broadcast, we cut to an overhead shot of the helicopter and... did you see that? Senna's head moved. When everyone saw this, everyone almost breathed a huge sigh of relief, seeing that the former champion was fine. But was it him moving, or was it a muscle spasm? Watkins and his team arrived a minute after the crash and immediately sought to figure out Senna's condition, and they quickly figured out his situation wasn't good. Senna had sustained 3 injuries on that crash. Upon the initial impact, the front right wheel of Senna's car shot up and struck him in the head, causing it to slam in the headrest. This resulted in a skull fracture. Following this, a piece of suspension had come through the car and penetrated Senna's helmet. Finally, a piece of the car's upright had gone through Senna's visor and hit him just above his right eye. Watkins removed Senna's helmet and a pool of blood came out. Watkins knew with that much damage done to his head, Senna would not survive. It is unclear which of these injuries was the fatal one. Many people speculate it was the suspension, and if the suspension was 6 inches higher or lower, Senna would have most likely survived and got out of his car. Senna was pulled out of his car and laid on the track, and many cameras, including the BBC's, switched to the pit lane. While Senna was still being inspected, and about 10 minutes after the crash, a car suddenly came shooting around and had to come to a very quick stop. That car belonged to Eric Comas, who was sent out by his team who were more focused on fixing the car than their surroundings. Once Comas saw the accident and that it was Senna who had the crash, he instantly jumped out of his car to his aid. Ironically, back in 1992, Senna had saved Comas' life after Comas had a nasty crash and was knocked out cold, his foot firmly on the accelerator. Hearing this, Senna stopped his car and got out into oncoming traffic to save Comas from blowing up his engine and in turn saving his life. Losing blood, Senna was put into the helicopter and flown immediately to the hospital rather than the medical centre. Rumours around the paddock speculated from a broken finger to him being dead. At the time, the official statement was that Senna was in a critical condition, but no further statements were given until after the race. Once the wreckage was being inspected, the marshals noticed something inside Senna's car. Wrapped up and covered in his blood was an Austrian flag, the same nationality of Ratzenberger. Senna planned to fly this flag on the victory lap and hold it up on the podium in memory of Ratzenberger when he won. For him and many others, it wasn't a matter of if he would win, but more when he'd win. 37 minutes after Senna's crash, the race continued, but at this point there was no joy in the race. The weekend was getting worse and worse as time went on, but as if there wasn't enough chaos happening that day with 3 driver collisions and a driver going into the wall, on lap 48, Minardi driver Michele Alboreto made a pit stop, and on his way out, the right rear wheel came off and went back into the pits, injuring 4 pit mechanics, 2 from Lotus and 2 from Ferrari. The race ended, and in first was Schumacher for the 3rd consecutive time. Out of respect for Ratzenberger, there wasn't much of a celebration and there was no champagne. With the race over, everyone's thoughts and prayers were with Senna, everyone hoping he was okay. And at 5 minutes past 6, the world heard the news.
Yesterday we had the loss of Roland Ratzenberger, the first Formula One racing fatality for 12 years. And today we've lost, arguably, the greatest talent of his generation. After a high-speed crash at Tamburello, Ayrton Senna is dead.
This sent shockwaves through the entire racing world and affected everyone. In Brazil, Senna's funeral was treated as a hero send-off with 4 days of national mourning. The same day as the Grand Prix, a NASCAR race was happening in the States.
Earlier today, the auto racing world lost perhaps, many people will tell you, its greatest competitor and best driver. Ayrton Senna, the 3-time world champion, was killed today in a Formula One race in Imola. 41 total career wins, 65 pole positions, and the 88, 90, and 91 World Driving Championships. Our sympathies to the Ayrton Senna family. He will be missed greatly by all of us interested in auto racing.
At the end of the race, winner Dale Earnhardt sent out his condolences to Senna's family, and his thoughts and prayers were with the entirety of Formula One. After Senna's death, Sid Watkins was brought on board to make the cars safer for all drivers. Many of his efforts can be seen to this day with things such as the harness device, which is used to stabilise the neck area more and lessen the chance of a broken neck or skull fracture in races. To this day, only one driver has died at a Formula 1 race, Jules Bianchi in 2014. Many drivers suffered with PTSD after Senna's death. None more so than Michael Schumacher, who saw the crash happen right in front of him. At the post-race press conference for the Italian Grand Prix in 2000, Schumacher had matched Senna's record of wins at 41, and after hearing Senna's name and trying to keep his composure, Schumacher broke down into tears, with championship rival Mika Hakkinen trying to calm him down before he almost lost it too. Only Ralf Schumacher, Michael's brother, was able to continue on, comforting his brother as he answered all the questions. We will never know what really caused Senna's accident. Some say it was a steering column breaking, others say it was a puncture. What cannot be disagreed is that his legacy lives on. Imola 1994 is undoubtedly the darkest weekend in Formula 1 history, with multiple injured, close calls and fatalities, including the loss of a young talent and one of the greatest to ever step foot in a car. But sadly, if it didn't happen here, it would have happened at some point. And as dark as it may seem, drivers today can thank those lost like Ratzenberger and Senna for making driver safety the priority and more important than anything else. Hey guys, thank you if you've stayed this far into the video. I know this was a fairly dark and possibly hard to watch video, so if you did watch on, then I thank you. A massive thank you also to the Formula 1 website and the Lights Out blog for providing the information and statistics for the weekend. Both websites will be linked in the description down below, and I know this isn't my normal type of content and not robots, but if you did enjoy, be sure to like the video and subscribe for more video essays and reviews. I'm the Seaborg signing out, and I will see you all in the next video. See you later.